Hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is Ike Madlantao, Minion for Hire, and you have now joined me again in my private place, away from all of my regular work. This is my private time, and if you're joining me right now, thank you. Um, I would normally use this time, try to decompress, I guess, after all the responsibilities I've had to go through over the course of the day. This is a time where I can actually geek out and be myself without worrying about being an evil minion for once. I have a small library. A lot of these books I haven't actually had the time to go and read myself. So I'm going to pick, go through them and let's see how far we can go. Okay, so the book that I have chosen tonight is actually this one. I will have to admit that I have not read any of this team, Mr. Cornwell's books before, so this is certainly a first for me. Anyway, mm, the usual things. Um, Sit back, relax, maybe grab yourselves a hot drink, maybe tea, and join me as I read through my first reading of Sharp. Any Sharp, actually. Oh, goodness. Okay. All right. Let's go. Mm. Bernard Cornwell's Sharf's Trafalgar, Spain, 1805. Richard Sharp and the Battle of Trafalgar, or Trafalgar, October 21st, 1805, by Bernard Cornwell. Mhm. Chapter 1. 115 rupees. Ensign Richard Sharp said, counting the money on the table. Nana Rao hissed in disapproval, rattled some beads along the wire bars of his abacus, and shook his head. 138 rupees, Sahib. 100 and bloody 15, Sharp insisted. It were £14, 7 shillings, and threepence halfpenny. Nana Rao examined his customer, gauging whether to continue the argument. He saw a young officer, a mere ensign of no importance, but this lowly Englishman had a very hard face, a scar on his right cheek, and showed no apprehension of the two hulking bodyguards who protected Nana Rao and his warehouse. 115, as you say, the merchant conceded, scooping the coins into a large black cash box. He offered Sharp an apologetic shrug. I get older, Sahib, and I find I cannot count. You can count all right, Sharp said, but you reckon I can't. But you will be very happy with your purchases, Nanarao said, for Sharp had just become the possessor of a hanging bed, two blankets, a teak traveling chest, a lantern and a box of candles, a hogshead of arrack, sorry about that, a wooden bucket, a box of soap, another of tobacco, and a brass and elmwood filtering machine which he had been assured would render water from the filthiest barrels stored in the bottommost part of a ship's hold into the sweetest and most palatable liquid. Nanarao had demonstrated the filtering machine, which he claimed had been brought out from London as part of the baggage of a director of the East India Company, who had insisted on only the finest equipment. You put the water here, see? The merchant had poured a pint or so of turbid water into the brass upper chamber. And then you allow the water to settle, Mr. Sharp. In 5 minutes it will be as clear as glass. You observe? He lifted the upper container to show water dripping from the packed muslin layers of the filter. I have myself cleaned the filter, Mr. Sharp, and I will warrant the item's efficiency. It would be a miserable pity to die of mud blockage in the bowel because you would not buy this thing. So Sharp had bought it. He had refused to purchase a chair, bookcase, sofa, or washstand, all pieces of furniture that had been used by passengers outward bound from London to Bombay. But he had paid for the filtering machine and all the other goods because otherwise his voyage home would be excruciatingly uncomfortable. Passengers on the great merchantmen of the East India Company were expected to supply their own furniture, unless you would like unless you would be liking to sleep on the deck, Sahib. Very hard, very hard. Nana Rao had laughed. He was a plump and seemingly friendly man with a large black mustache and a quick smile. His business was to purchase the furniture of incoming passengers, which he then sold to those folk who were going home. You will leave the goods here, he told Sharp, and on the day of your embarkation my cousin will deliver them to your ship. Which ship is that? The Calliope, Sharp said. Ah, the Calliope. Captain Cromwell. Alas, the Calliope is anchored in the roads, so the goods will need to be carried out by boat. But my cousin charges very little for such a service, Mr. Sharp. Very little. And when you are happily arrived in London, you can sell the items for much profit. Which might, or more probably might not have been true, but was irrelevant, because the same night, just 2 days before Sharp was on the embark, Nana Rao's godown was burned to the ground, and all the goods, the beds, bookcases, lanterns, water filters, blankets, boxes, tables, and chairs, the arrack, soap, tobacco, brandy, and wine were supposedly consumed with the warehouse. In the morning there was nothing but ashes, smoke, and a group of shrieking mourners who wailed that the kindly Nana Rao had died in a conflagration. Happily, another godown, not 300 yards from Nana Rao's ruined business, was well supplied with all the necessities for the voyage, and that second warehouse did a fine trade as disgruntled passengers replaced their vanished goods at prices that were almost double those than that Nana Rao had charged. Richard Sharp did not buy anything from the second warehouse. He had been in Bombay for 5 months, much of that time spent sweating and shivering in the castle hospital. But when the fever had passed, and while he was waiting for the annual convoy to arrive from Britain with the ship that would carry him home, he had explored the city, from the wealthy houses in the Malabar Hills to the pestilential alleyways by the waterfront. He had found companionship in the alleyways, and it was one of those acquaintances who, in return for a golden guinea, gave Sharp a scrap of information which the ensign reckoned was worth far more than a guinea. It was, indeed, worth 115 rupees, which was why, at nightfall, Sharp was in another alley on the eastern outskirts of the city. He wore his uniform, though over it he had donned a swathing cloth, cloak, sorry, made of cheap sacking, which was thickly impregnated with mud and filth. He limped and shuffled, his body bent over with the hand outstretched as though he was begging. He muttered to himself and twitched, and sometimes turned and snarled at some innocent soul for no apparent reason. He went utterly unnoticed. He found the house he wanted and squatted by its wall. A score of beggars, some horribly maimed, were gathered by the gate along with almost 100 petitioners who waited for the house's owner, a wealthy merchant, to return from his place of business. The merchant came after nightfall, riding in a curtained palanquin that was carried by 8 men, while another dozen men whacked the beggars out of the way with long staves. But once the merchant's palanquin was safe inside the courtyard, the gates were left open so the petitioners and beggars could follow. The beggars Sharp among them, were pushed to one side of the yard, while the petitioners gathered at the foot of the broad steps that climbed to the house door. Lanterns hung from the coconut palms that arched over the yard, while from inside the big house yellow candlelight glimmered behind filigree shutters. Sharp pushed as close to the house as he could, staying in the shadow of the palm trunks. Under the greasy cloak he had his cavalry saber and a loaded pistol, though he hoped he would need neither weapon. The merchant was called Panjit, and he kept the petitioners and beggars waiting until he had eaten his evening meal. But then the house door was thrown open, and Panjit, resplendent in a long robe of embroidered yellow silk, appeared on the top step. The petitioners called aloud, while the beggars shuffled forward until they were driven back by the staves of the bodyguards. The merchant smiled, then rang a small handbell to attract the attention of a brightly painted god who sat in a niche of the courtyard wall. Panjit bowed to the god, and then, in answer to Sharp's prayers, a second man, this one dressed in a red robe, emerged from the house door. The second man was Nana Rao. He had a wide smile, and no wonder, for he was quite untouched by fire, and, as Sharp's guinea had discovered, he was also the first cousin of Panjit, who was the merchant who had profited so greatly by owning the second warehouse that he had replaced the goods supposedly destroyed in Nanarao's calamitous fire. It had been a slick deception, enabling the cousins to sell the same goods twice, and tonight, replete with their swollen profits, they were choosing which men would be given the lucrative job of rowing the passengers and their belongings out to the great ships that lay in the anchorage. The chosen men would be required to pay for the privilege, thus enriching Panjit and Nanarao even more, and the two cousins, aware of their good fortune, planned to propitiate the gods by distributing some petty coins to the beggars. Sharp was reckoning that he could reach Nanarao in the guise of a supplicant, then throw off the filthy cloak and shame the man into returning his money. The competent-looking bodyguards at the foot of the steps suggested that his skimpy plan might prove more complicated than he envisaged, but Sharp guessed Nanarao would not want his deception revealed, and so would probably be happy to pay him off. Sharp was close to the house now. He had noticed that the empty palanquin had been carried down a narrow and dark passage that led alongside the building, evidently giving access to a courtyard at the rear of the house, and he was considering going down to the passage and coming back through the building to approach Nana Rao from the rear. But any of the beggars who ventured near the passage were beaten back by the bodyguards. The petitioners were being allowed onto the steps in small groups, but the beggars were expected to wait until the main business of the evening was over. Sharp suspected it would be a long night, but he was content to wait with his cloak hood pulled over his face. He squatted against the wall, waiting for an opportunity to dash into the passageway beside the house. But then a servant, who had been guarding the outer gate, pushed through the crowd and spoke in Panjit's ear. For an instant the merchant looked alarmed, and a silence fell over the courtyard. But then he whispered to Nanarao, who just shrugged. Panjit clapped his hands and shouted at the bodyguards, who energetically drove the petitioners back to form an open passage between the gate and the steps. Someone was plainly coming to the house, and Nanarao, nervous of their appearance, stepped into the black shadow of the back of the porch. The way was clear now for Sharp to go down the passage beside the house, but curiosity held him in place. There was a commotion in the alley, sounding like the jeers and scramble that always accompanied a band of constables marching through the lesser streets of London. Then the outer gate was pushed fully open, and Sharp could only stare in astonishment. A group of British sailors stood in the gate, led by a naval captain, a post captain no less, who was immaculate in cocked hat, blue frock coat, silk breeches and stockings, silver buckled shoes, and slim sword. The lantern light reflected from the heavy gold bullion of his twin epaulets. He took off his hat, revealing thick blond hair, smiled, and bowed. "Do I have the honor," he asked, "of coming to the house of Panjit Lashti?" Panjit nodded cautiously. This is the house, he said in English. The naval captain put on his cocked hat. I have come, he announced in a friendly voice that had a distinct Devonshire accent, for Nana Rao. He is not here, Panjit answered. The captain glanced at the red-robed figure in the port shadows. His ghost will do very well. I have answered you, Panjit said, defiance now making his voice angry. He is not here. He is dead. The captain smiled. My name is Chase, he said courteously. Captain Joel Chase of His Britannic Majesty's Navy, and I would be obliged if Nana Rao would come with me. His body was burned, Panjit declared fiercely, and his ashes have gone to the river. Why do you not seek him there? He is no more dead than you or I, Chase said, then waved his men forward. He had brought a dozen seamen, all identically dressed in white duck trousers, red and white hoop shirts, and straw hats stiffened with pitch and circled with red and white ribbons. They wore long pigtails and carried thick staves, which Sharp guessed were capstans bars. Their leader was a huge man whose bare forearms were thick with tattoos, while beside him was a negro, every bit as tall, who carried his capstan bar as though it were a hazel wand. Nanarao! Chase abandoned the pretense that the merchant was dead. You owe me a deal of money, and I have come to collect it. What is your authority to be here? Panjit demanded. The crowd, most of whom did not understand English, watched the sailors nervously. But Panjit's bodyguards, who outnumbered Chase's men, were just as well armed, seemed eager to be loosed on the seamen. My authority, Chase said grandly, is my empty purse. He smiled. You surely do not wish me to use force. Use force, Captain Chase, Panjit answered just as grandly, and I shall have you in front of a magistrate by dawn. I shall happily appear in court, Chase said, so long as Nana Rao is beside me. Panjit shook his hands as if he were shooing Chase and his men away from the courtyard. You will leave, Captain. You will leave my house now. I think not, Chase said. Go, or I will summon authority, Panjit insisted. Chase turned to the huge tattooed man. Nana Rao's the bugger with the mustache and red silk robe, bosun. Get him. The British seamen charged forward, relishing the chance of a scrap, but Panjit's bodyguards were no less eager, and the two groups met in the courtyard center with a sickening crash of stabs, skulls, and fists. The seamen had the best of it at first, for they had charged with a ferocity that drove the bodyguards back to the foot of the steps. But Panjit's men were both more numerous and more accustomed to fighting with long clubs. They rallied at the steps, then used their staves like spears to tangle the tailors' legs, and, one by one, the pig-tailed men were tripped and beaten down. The boatswain and the negro were the last to fall. They tried to protect their captain, who was using his fists handily, but the British soldiers, oh, sorry, but the British sailors had woefully underestimated the opposition and were doomed. Sharp sidled toward the steps, elbowing the beggars aside. The crowd was jeering at the defeated British seamen. Panjit and Nanarao were laughing, while the petitioners, emboldened by the success of the bodyguards, jostled each other for a chance to kick the fallen men. Some of the bodyguards were wearing the sailors' tarred hats, while another pranced in triumph with Chase's cocked hat on his head. The captain was a prisoner, his arms pinioned by two men. One of the bodyguards had stayed with Panjit and saw Sharp edging toward the steps. He came down fast, shouting that Sharp should go back, and when the cloaked beggar did not obey, he aimed a kick at him. Sharp grabbed the man's foot and kept it swinging upward so that the bodyguard fell on his back, and his head struck the bottom step with a sickening thump that went unnoticed in the noisy celebration of the British defeat. Panjit was shouting for quiet, holding his hands aloft. Nanarao was laughing, his shoulders heaving with merriment, while Sharp was in the shadow of the bushes at the side of the steps. The victorious bodyguards pushed the petitioners and beggars away from the bruised and bloodied sailors, who, disarmed, could only watch as their disheveled captain was ignominiously hustled to the bottom of the steps. Panjit shook his head in mock sadness. What am I to do with you, captain? Chase shook his hands free. His fair hair was darkened by blood that trickled down his cheek, but he was still defiant. I suggest, he said, that you give me Nana Rao and pray to whatever god you trust that I do not bring you before the magistrates. Panjit looked pained. It is you, Captain, who will be in court, he said. And how will that look? Captain Chase of His Britannic Majesty's Navy, convicted of forcing his way into a private house, and they were brawling like a drunkard. I think, Captain Chase, that you and I better discuss. Ooh, hold on. Discuss what terms we can agree to avoid that fate. Panjit waited, but Chase said nothing. He was beaten. Panjit frowned at the bodyguard who had the captain's hat and ordered the man to give it back, then smiled. I do not want a scandal any more than you, Captain, but I shall survive any scandal that this sad affair starts, and you will not. So I think you had better make me an offer. A loud click interrupted Panjit. It was not a single click, but more like a loud metallic scratching that ended in the solid round of a pistol being cocked, and Panjit turned to see the red-coated British officer with black hair and a scarred face was standing beside his cousin, holding a blackened pistol muzzle at Nana Rao's temple. The bodyguards glanced at Panjit, saw his uncertainty, and some of them hefted their staves, and moved toward the steps. But Sharp gripped Nanarao's hair with his left hand and kicked him in the back of the knees so that the merchant dropped hard down with a cry of hurt surprise. The sudden brutality and Sharp's evident readiness to pull the trigger checked the bodyguards. I think you'd better make me an offer, Sharp said to Panjit, because this dead cousin of yours owes me 14 pounds, 7 shillings, and threepence halfpenny. Put the pistol away, Panjit said, waving his bodyguards back. He was nervous. Dealing with a courteous naval captain who was an obvious gentleman was one thing, but the red-coated ensign looked wild, and the pistol muzzle was grinding into Nanarao's skull, so that the merchant whimpered with pain. Just put the pistol away, Panjit said soothingly. You think I'm daft? Sharp sneered. Besides, the magistrates can't do anything to me if I shoot your cousin. He's already dead. You said so yourself. He's nothing but ashes in the river. He twisted Nanarao's hair, making the kneeling man gasp. 14 pounds, Sharp said. 7 shillings and threepence halfpenny. I'll pay it, Nanarao gasped. And Captain Chase wants his money too, Sharp said. 216 guineas, Chase said, brushing off his hat. Though I think we deserve a little more for having worked the miracle of bringing Nanarao back to life. Panjit was no fool. He looked at Chase's seamen who were picking up their capstans bars and readying themselves to continue the fight. No magistrates, he said. He asked Sharp. I hate magistrates, Sharp said. Panjit's face betrayed a flicker of a smile. If you were to let go of my cousin's hair, he suggested, then I think we can talk business. Sharp let go of Nanarao, lowered the flint of the pistol, and stepped back. He stood momentarily to attention. Ensign Sharp, sir, he introduced himself to Chase. You are no Ensign Sharp, but a ministering angel. Chase climbed the steps with an outstretched hand. Despite the blood on his face, he was a good-looking man, with the confidence and friendliness that seemed to come from a contented and good-natured character. You are the Deus ex machina, Ensign, as welcome as a whore on a gun deck or a breeze in the horse latitudes. He spoke he spoke lightly, but there was no doubt that the fervency of his thanks, and, instead of shaking Sharp's hand, he embraced him. Thank you, he whispered, then stepped back. Hopper! Sir! The huge boatswain with the tattooed arms, who had been laying enemies left and right before he was overwhelmed, stepped forward. Clear the decks, Hopper. Our enemies wish to discuss surrender terms. Aye, aye, sir. And this is Ensign Sharp, Hopper, and he is to be treated as a most honored friend. Aye, aye, sir, Hopper said, grinning. Hopper commands my barge crew. Sharp, Chase explained to Sharp, and those battered gentlemen are his oarsmen. This night may not go down as one of our greater victories, gentlemen. Chase was now addressing his bruised and bleeding men, but a victory it still is, and I thank you. The yard was cleared, the chairs were fetched from the house, and terms were discussed. It had been a guinea, Sharp thought, exceedingly well spent. Let me rearrange. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Continue on. I rather like the fellows, she said. Panjit and Nanarao? The rogues, Sharp said. I like them too. They took their defeat like gentlemen. They got off light, sir, Sharp said. Must have made a fortune on that fire. Oh, the trick in a bag, Captain Chase said. There used to be a fellow on the Isle of Dogs who claimed thieves had cleaned out his chandelier, Larry, on the night before some foreign ship sailed, and the victims always fell for it. Chase chuckled, and Sharp said nothing. He had known the man Chase spoke of, and had even helped him clear the warehouse one night, but he thought it best to be silent. But you and I are all right, Sharp, other than a scratch and a bruise, Chase went on. And that's all that matters, eh? We're all right, sir, Sharp agreed. The two men, followed by Chase's barge crew, were walking back through the pungent alleys of Bombay, and both were carrying money. Chase had originally contracted with Rao to supply his ship with rum, brandy, wine, and tobacco, and now, instead of the 260 guineas he had paid the merchant, he was carrying 300, while Sharp had 200 rupees, so all in all, Sharp reckoned it had been a good evening's work, especially as Panjit had promised to supply Sharp with the bed, blanket, bucket, lantern, chest, arrack, tobacco, soap, and filter machine, all to be delivered to the Calliope at dawn, and at no cost to Sharp. The two Indians had been eager to placate the Englishmen once they realized that Chase and Sharp had no intention of telling the rest of the fleeced victims that Nana Rao still lived, and so the merchants had fed their unwanted guests, plied them with arrack, paid the money, sworn eternal friendship, and bid them good night. Now Chase and Sharp groped their way through the dark city. God, this place stinks, Chase said. You've not been here before, Sharp asked, surprised. I've been 5 months in India, Chase said, but always at sea. Now I'm living ashore for a week and it stinks. My God, how the place stinks. No more than London, Sharp said, which was true. But here the smells were different. Instead of coal fumes, there was bullock dung, smoke, and the rich odors of spice and sewage. It was a sweet smell, ripe even, but not unpleasant, and Sharp was thinking back to when he had first arrived, and how he had recoiled from the smell that he now thought homely and even enticing. I'll miss it, he admitted. I sometimes wish I wasn't going back to England. Which ship are you on? The Calliope. Chase evidently found that amusing. So, what do you make of the peculiar? Sharp asked. Peculiar Cromwell, of course, the captain. Chase looked at Sharp. Surely you've met him. I haven't. Never heard of him. But the convoy must have arrived 2 months ago, Chase said. It did. Then you should have made an effort to see Peculiar. That's his real name, by the way. Peculiar Cromwell. Odd, eh? He was Navy once. Most of the East Indiamen captains were Navy, but Peculiar resigned because he wanted to become rich. He also believed he should have been made admiral without spending tedious years as a mere captain. He's an odd soul, but he sails a tidy ship, and a fast one. I can't believe you didn't make an effort to meet him. Why should I? Sharp asked. To make sure you get some privileges aboard, of course. Can I assume you'll be traveling in steerage? I'm traveling cheap, if that's what you mean, Sharp said. He spoke bitterly, for though he had paid the lowest possible rate, his passage was still costing him £107 and 15 shillings. He had thought the army would pay for the voyage, but the army had refused, saying that Sharp was accepting an invitation to join the 95th Rifles, and if the 95th Rifles refused to pay his passage, then damn them, damn their badly colored coats, and damn Sharp. So he had cut one of the precious, so he had cut one of the precious diamonds from the seam of his red coat, and paid for the voyage himself. He still had a king's ransom in the precious stones that he had taken from the Tipu Sultan's body in the Dang tunnel at Seringapatam, but he resented using the loot to pay the East India Company. Britain had sent Sharp to India, and Britain, Sharp reckoned, should fetch him back. So the clever thing to have done, Sharp, Chase said, would have been to introduce yourself to Peculiar while he was still living ashore and given the greedy bugger a present, because then he'd have assigned you to decent quarters. But if you haven't crossed Peculiar's palm with silver, Sharp, he'll like as not he'll like as not have you down in lower steerage with the rats with the rats. Main deck steerage is much better and doesn't cost a penny more, but the lower steerage is nothing but farts, vomit, and misery all the way home. The two men had left the narrow alleyways and were leading the barge crew down a street that was edged with sewage-filled ditches. It was a t- it was a tin smithing quarter, and the forges were already burning bright as the sound of hammers rattled the night. Pale cows watched the sailors pass, and dogs barked frantically, waking the homeless poor who huddled between the ditches and the house walls. "It's a pity you're sailing in convoy," Chase said. "Why, sir?" "Because a convoy goes at the speed of its slowest boat," Chase explained. "Calliope could make England in 3 months if she was allowed to fly, but she'll have to limp. I wish I was sailing with you. I'd offer you passage myself as thanks for your rescue tonight, but alas, I am ghost hunting." "Ghost hunting, sir? You've heard of the Revenant?" "No, sir." "The ignorance of you soldiers," Chase said, amused. "The Revenant, my dear Sharp, is a French 74 that is haunting the Indian Ocean. Hides himself in Mauritius, sallies out to snap out prizes, then scuttles back before we can catch her. I'm here to stifle her ardor, only before I can hunt her, I have to scrape the bottom. My ship's too slow after 8 months at sea, so we scour off the barnacles to quicken her up." "I wish you good fortune, sir," Sharp said, then frowned. "But what's that got to do that got to do with ghosts?" He usually did not like asking such questions. Sharp had once marched in the ranks of a Redcoat battalion, but he had been made into an officer, and so found himself in a world where almost every man was educated except himself. He had become accustomed to allowing small mysteries to slide past him, but Sharp decided he did not mind revealing his ignorance to a man as good-natured as Chase. "Revenant is the frog word for ghost," Chase said. "Noun, masculine. I had a tutor for these things who flogged the language into me, and I'd like to flog it out of him now." In a nearby yard a cockerel crowed, and Chase glanced up the sky. "Almost dawn," he said. "Perhaps you'll permit me to give you breakfast. Then my lads will take you out to the Calliope. Godspeed on your way home, eh?" Home. It seemed an odd word to Sharp, for he did not have a home other than the army, and he had not seen England in 6 years. 6 years! Yet he felt no pang of delight at the prospect of sailing to England. He did not think of it as home. Indeed, he had no idea where home was, but wherever that elusive place lay, he was going there. Chase was living ashore while his ship was cleaned of the weed. "We tip her over, scrape her copper sheath bum clean when the tide is low, and float her off," he explained, as servants brought coffee, boiled eggs, bread rolls, ham, cold chicken, and a basket of mangoes. "Bum scrubbing is a damn nuisance. All the guns have to be shipped, and half the contents of the hold dragged out, but she'll sail like a beauty when it's done. Have more eggs than that, Sharp? You must be hungry. I am. Like the house. It belongs to my wife's first cousin. He's a trader here, though right now he's up in the hills doing whatever traders do when they're making themselves rich. It was his steward who alerted me to Danarow's tricks. Sit down, Sharp. Sit down, Sharp. Sit down. Eat." They took their breakfast in the shade of a wide veranda that looked out on a small garden, a road, and the sea. Chase was gracious, generous, and apparently oblivious of the vast gulf that existed between a mere ensign, the lowest of the army's commissioned ranks, and a post captain, who was officially the equivalent of an army colonel. Though on board his own ship, such a man outranked the very powers of heaven. Sharp had been conscious of that wide gulf at first, but it had gradually dawned on him that Joel Chase was genuinely good-natured, and Sharp had warmed to the naval officer, whose gratitude was unstinting and heartfelt. "Do you realize that Bugger Panjit really could have had me in front of the magistrates?" Chase inquired. "Dear God, Sharp, that would have been a pickle, and Nanara would have vanished, and who'd have believed me if I said the dead had come back to life? To have more ham, please. It would have meant an inquiry at the very least, and almost hold on, next page. And almost certainly a court martial. I'd have been damn lucky to have survived with my command intact. But how was I to know he had a private army?" "We came out of it all right, sir. Thanks to you, Sharp, thanks to you." Chase shuddered. My father always said I'd be dead before I was 30, and I'd beaten that by 5 years. But one day I'll jump into trouble and there'll be no ensign to pull me out. He patted the bag which held the money he had taken from Nana Rao and Banjit. And between you and me, Sharp, the cash is a windfall. A windfall. Do you think we could grow mangoes in England? I don't know, sir. I shall try. Plant a couple in a warm spot in the garden, and who knows? Chase poured coffee and stretched out his long legs. He was curious why Sharp, a man in his late twenties, would only be an ensign, but he made the inquiry with an exquisite tact, and once he discovered that Sharp had been promoted from the ranks, he was genuine in his admiration. I once had a captain who'd come up through the wow, what's this? Hoss hole, he told Sharp. And he was a damn good. He knew his business, understood what went on in the dark places where most captains dare not look. I reckon the army's lucky in you, Sharp. I'm not sure they think so, sir. I shall whisper in some ears, Sharp, though if I don't catch the Reverend, there'll be precious few who'll listen to me. You'll catch her, sir. I pray so. But she's a fast beast, fast and slippery. All French ships are. God knows the buggers can't sail them, but they do know how to build them. French ships are like French women, Sharp, beautiful and fast, but hopelessly manned. Have some mustard. Chase pushed the jar across the table, then petted a skinny black kitten as he stared past the palm trees toward the sea. I do like coffee, he said, then pointed out to the sea. There's the calliope. Oops, hold on. Give me some second here. Okay, continuing on. Sharp looked, but all he could see was a mass of shipping far out in the harbor, beyond the shallower water, which was busy with scores of bumboats, launches, and fishing craft. She's the one drying her topsails, Chase said, and Sharp saw that one of the far ships had hung out her topmost sails, but at this distance she looked like the dozen other East Indiamen that would sail home together to protect themselves against the privateers who haunted the Indian Ocean. From the shore they looked like naval ships, for their hulls were banded black and white to suggest that massive broadsides were concealed behind closed gun ports. But the ruse would not mislead any privateer. Those ships, their hulls stuffed with the riches of India, were the greatest prizes any corsair or French naval captain could wish to take. If a man wanted to live and die rich, then all he needed to do was capture an Indiaman, which is why the great ships sailed in convoy. "Where's your ship, sir?" Sharp asked. "Can't see her from here," Chase said. "She's careened on the mudbank on the far side of Elephanta Island." "Careened?" "Tipped on her side so we can polish her bum." "What's she called?" Chase looked abashed. "Pucelle," he said. "Pucelle? Sounds French." "It is French, Sharp. It means virgin." Chase pretended to be offended as Sharp laughed. "You held of La Pucelle de Holland?" he asked. "No, sir. The Maid of Orleans Sharp was Joan of Arc, and the ship was named for her, and I trust she doesn't end up like Joan, burned to crisp." "But why would you name a boat for a Frenchwoman, sir?" Sharps asked. "We didn't. The frogs did. She was a French boat till Nelson took her at the Nile. If you capture a ship, Sharp, you keep the old name unless it's really obnoxious. Nelson took the Franklin at the Nile, an 80-gun thing of great beauty, but the Navy will be damned if it has a ship named after a traitor's bloody Yankee. So we called her the Canopus now. But my ship kept her name, and she's a lovely beast, lovely and fast. Oh my God, no!" He sat up straight, staring at the road. "Oh God, no!" Those last words were prompted by the sight of an open carriage that had slowed and now stopped just beyond the garden gate. Chase, who had been genial until this moment, suddenly looked bitter. Pardon me. A man and a woman were seated in the carriage, which was driven by an Indian dressed in yellow and black livery. Two native footmen, arrayed in the same livery, now hurried to open the carriage door and unfold the steps, allowing the man, who was dressed in a white linen jacket, to step down the pavement. A beggar immediately swung on short crutches and calloused stumps towards the carriage, but one of the footmen fended the man off with a sharp kick, and the coachman completed the rout with his whip. The white-jacketed man was middle-aged and had a face that reminded Sharp of Sir Arthur Wellesley. Maybe it was the prominent nose, or perhaps it was the cold and haughty look on that the man wore, or perhaps it was just that everything about him, from his carriage to the liveried servants, spoke of privilege. Lord William Hale, Chase said, investing every syllable with dislike. Never heard of him. He's on the board of control, Chase explained, then saw Sharp's raised eyebrow. 6 men Sharp were appointed by the government to make certain that the East India Company doesn't do anything foolish. Or rather that, if it does, no blame attaches itself to the government. He looked sourly at Lord William, who had paused to speak with the woman in the carriage. That's his wife, and I've just brought the two of them from Calcutta so they could go home on the same convoy as yourself. You should pray they aren't on the Calliope. Lord William was gray-haired, and Sharp assumed his wife would also be middle-aged. But when she lowered her white parasol, Sharp had a clear view of her ladyship, and the breath was checked in his throat. She was much younger than Lord William, and her pale, slender face had a haunting beauty, almost a sadness that struck Sharp with the force of a bullet. He stared at her, entranced by her. Chase smiled at Sharp's smitten expression. She was born Grace de la Vere Gould, third daughter of the Earl of Selby. She's 20 years younger than her husband, but just as cold. Sharp could not take his eyes from her ladyship, for she was truly beautiful, breathtakingly, achingly, untouchably beautiful. Her face was pale as ivory, sharp-shadowed as she leaned toward her husband, and framed by heavy loops of black hair that were pinned to appear artless, but which even Sharp could tell must have taken her maid an age to arrange. She did not smile, but just gazed solemnly into her husband's face. She looked sad rather than cold, Sharp said. Chase mocked the wistfulness in Sharp's voice. What does she have to be sad about? Her beauty is her fortune, Sharp, and her husband is as rich as he is ambitious as he is clever. She's on her way to being wife of the Prime Minister. She's on her way to being wife of the Prime Minister so long as Lord William doesn't put a foot wrong, and believe me, he steps as lightly as a cat. Lord William concluded the conversation with his wife, then gestured for a footman to open Chase's gate. "You might have taken a house with a carriage drive," he admonished the naval captain as he strode up the short path. "It's devilish annoying being pestered by beggars every time one makes a call." "Alas, my lord, we sailors are so inept on land, I cannot entice your wife to take some coffee." "Her ladyship is not well." Lord William ran up the veranda steps, gave Sharp a careless glance, then held a hand toward Chase as if expecting to be given something. He must have noted the blood that was still crusted in Chase's fair hair, but he made no mention of it. "Well, Chase, can you settle?" Chase reluctantly found the big leather bag which held the coins he had taken from Nana Rao, and counted out a substantial portion that he gave to Lord William. His lordship shuddered at the thought of handling the grubby currency, but forced himself to take the money and pour it into his coat's tail pockets. "Your note," he said, and handed Chase a scrap of paper. "You haven't received new orders, I suppose?" "Alas, no, my lord. We are still ordered to find the revenant. I was hoping you'd be going home instead. It is crucial I reach London quickly." He frowned, then without another word turned away. "You did not give me a chance, my lord," Chase said, "to introduce my particular friend, Mr. Sharp." Lord William bestowed a second brief look at Sharp, and his lordship saw nothing to contradict his first opinion that the ensign was penniless and powerless, for he merely looked, calculated, and glanced away without offering any acknowledgment. But in that brief meeting of eyes, Sharp had received an impression of force, confidence, and arrogance. Lord William was a man who had more than his share of power. Oops, excuse me. He wanted more, and he would not waste time on those who had nothing to give him. "Mr. Sharp served under Sir Arthur Wellesley," Chase said. "As did many thousands of others, I believe," Lord William said carelessly, then frowned. "There is a service you can do me, Chase." I am, of course, entirely at your lordship's convenience, Chase said politely. You have a barge and a crew? All captains do, Chase said. We must reach the Calliope. You could take us there. Alas, my lord, I have promised Mr. Sharp the barge, Chase said, but I am sure he will gladly share it with you. He, too, is bound for the Calliope. I'd be happy to help, Sharp said. Lord William's expression suggested that Sharp's help was the last thing he would ever require. We shall let our present arrangement stand, he told Chase, and wasting no more time, stalked away. Chase laughed loudly. Share a boat with you, Sharp? He'd rather sprout wings and fly. I wouldn't mind sharing a boat with her, Sharp said, staring at the Lady Grace, who was gazing fixedly ahead as a score of beggars whimpered a safe distance from the coachman's stinging whip. My dear Sharp, Chase said, watching the carriage draw away, you will be sharing that lady's company for at least 4 months, and I doubt you will even see her. Lord William claims she suffers from delicate nerves and is averse to company. I had her on board the Pucelle for near a month, and might have seen her twice. She sticks to her cabin, or else walks the poop at night when no one can accost her. And I will wager you a month of your wages to a year of mine that you will not even know your name by the time you reach England. Sharp smiled. I don't wager. Good for you, Chase said. Like a fool, I played too much whilst in Hmm. Like a fool, I played too much whist in the last month. I promised my wife I wouldn't plunge heavily, and God punished me for it. Dear me, what a fool I am. I played almost every night between Calcutta and here, and lost 170 guineas to that rich bastard. My own fault, he admitted ruefully, and I won't succumb again. He reached out to touch the wood of the tabletop as if he did not trust his own resolve. But cash is always short, isn't it? I'll just have to capture the Revenant and earn myself some decent prize money. You'll manage that, Sharp said comfortingly. Chase smiled. I do hope so. I fervently hope so. But once in a while, Sharp, the damn frogs throw up a real seaman, and the Revenant is in the hands of Captain Louis Montmorton. He's good. His men are good, and his ship is good. But you're British, Sharp said, so you must be better. Amen to that, Chase said. Amen. He wrote his English address on a scrap of paper, then insisted on walking Sharp to the fort, where the ensign collected his pack, after which the two men went past the still smoking ruins of Nana Rao's warehouse to the quay where Chase's barge waited. The naval captain shook Sharp's hand. I remain entirely your debt, Sharp. You're making too much of it, sir. Chase shook his head. I was a fool last night, and if it hadn't been for you, I'd be looking an even greater fool this morning. I am beholden to you, Sharp, and shall not forget it. We'll meet again, I'm sure of it. I hope so, sure, Sharp said, then went down the greasy steps. It was time to go home. Well, now, that was quite reading. I went from, oh, let's see here. I went from page 1 page 19. Um, and that's like 48 minutes done. So, well, all in all, I think that was a good session. No one dropped in, but that's fine. I'm used to talk to myself. Anyway, thank you for doing this session of reading through Bernard Cornwell's Sharp's Trafalgar. And it is late enough as it is. Time to turn in. Thank you for indulging this NPC, this nobody in the crowd, in the quiet time in between the night and the daytime, where I don't have to worry about the mad geniuses that I have to work for. Anyway, thank you. Again, my name is Ike Madlang Tao, part-time minion. Thank you. I know I'm a nobody, but if you liked what you, if you liked what I've read and would like to join me next time, and drop by again, hopefully at a better time, Now I'm a nobody, a face in the crowd. But if I become someone, if I become a somebody, then I'll be thankful as well. A pleasant evening to all. And you go out there and make the world a better place for the nobodies like myself. Take care.